following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Chuck Stevens, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the Wednesday, February 11th issue of the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Lie jail term essentially a life sentence. Niagara continues fight to free the NOTL hoteler. Niagara-on-the-Lake advocates demanding the release of pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai from jail were saddened but not surprised that a Hong Kong court gave the former Apple Daily owner a 20-year sentence for alleged sedition and conspiracy charges. It is really heartbreaking for the family and everybody involved, said Ladija Biro of Niagara-on-the-Lake's Amnesty International Group 137. The length of the prison term is essentially a life sentence for Jimmy. Lai and family established Vintage Hotels, a popular luxury accommodation business that in Niagara-on-the-Lake includes Pillar and Post Hotel and Spa, Queen's Landing, and the Prince of Wales. Lai, age 78, who is a British citizen, has been in jail since 2020 and has faced multiple prosecutions, including for using his now shuttered newspaper to call for sanctions against Hong Kong and China during large anti-government protests in 2019, and for alleged sedition and conspiracy to collude with foreign forces under the controversial law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong and Special Administration region. Lai was convicted by a Hong Kong court last December and was sentenced Monday. Lai had earlier been convicted of fraud in regards to his Apple Daily publication and was already serving a 5-year, 19-month sentence. Hong Kong Judge Esther To said during Monday's sentencing that 18 years of Lai's sentence should be served consecutively to his current jail term. Lai could have received a life sentence under the charges against him. Lai can still appeal his case. Lai's co-defendants, 6 employees who worked at Apple Daily, and 2 activists, received terms of between 6 and 10 years in jail on collusion-related charges. China is sending a message telling other countries not to interfere in its internal affairs, said Biro. She said Niagara-on-the-Lake residents will continue to support Lai and encourage Canada and other world leaders to help put pressure on China to release him. We will continue to write to him and challenge governments to press for his release. We want to keep his spirit up to make sure he knows the world is watching. But with Canada and other countries agreeing to trade deals with China, they have no negotiating leverage with the Chinese authorities to put pressure on the country to demand a release, Biro said. Family members, countries, and organizations from around the world condemned the sentence in statements calling on China to release Lai on humanitarian grounds. Sebastian Lai said, "Sentencing my father to this draconian prison sentence is devastating for our family and life-threatening for my father. It signifies the total destruction of the Hong Kong legal system and the end of justice." Lai's daughter, Clara Lai, said the sentence is heartbreakingly cruel. "Over the last 5 years, I have watched my father's health deteriorate dramatically, and the conditions he's kept in go from bad to worse. If this sentence is carried out, he'll die a martyr behind bars." Lai's international legal team, led counsel Californian Gallagher, said the sentence is the final blow to the rule of law in Hong Kong. Sentencing Jimmy Lai on 2 decades behind bars is an affront to justice and the culmination of over 5 years of malicious lawfare against a courageous elderly British citizen and prisoner of conscience. Lai's sentence was condemned by Canada, United Kingdom, the U.S., and European Union and other countries. Yvette Cooper, United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, said that the judge's decision is tantamount to a life sentence. I remain deeply concerned for Mr. Lai's health, and I again call on the Hong Kong authorities to end his appalling ordeal and release him on humanitarian grounds. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, called for Lai's release on humanitarian grounds and said Canada is disappointed with the outcome. Canada will continue to support free and independent media worldwide, she said. Canada's Conservative Party called for the immediate release of Lai. Conservatives stand in solidarity with Mr. Lai and the people of Hong Kong, said Michael Chong, the party's shadow minister for foreign affairs. We urge the governments of the PRC in Hong Kong to respect international law and the rights and freedoms guaranteed in the Sino-British Joint Declaration by immediately release Jimmy Lai. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in a statement, called Lai's sentence an unjust and tragic conclusion to this case. Rubio said Lai's family had suffered enough and the pro-democracy activist should be granted humanitarian parole. Former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence said freedom-loving people around the world know that the sentence is a travesty and cannot stand. He called on Donald Trump's administration to demand that China free Lai. President Trump has over the past year said he will push for Lai's release and has raised the issue during meetings with the Chinese president. Next up from the Niagara Falls Review, Gale wants $3 million in cuts to region budget. Potential savings address concern about affordability. Niagara Region Chair Bob Gale has identified more than $3 million in potential savings for the municipality's 2026 budget. He said addresses residents' concern about affordability and rising costs. Any decisions would still need council approval, but the changes would collectively reduce this year's budget increase to 6.37%. Without Gale's proposed cuts, the levy billed to Niagara taxpayers is set to increase by 6.98%, resulting in a $225 property tax increase on the average market value home of $620,600. I asked staff to take a deeper look at our operations to identify immediate opportunities for budget savings, Gale said in a media release issued Monday evening. I directed the team to look for savings without touching health care, long-term care, or any essential or social services. I have heard clearly from taxpayers across Niagara that they are feeling financial pressures. Residents have been asking us to keep increases as low as possible, and I take that responsibility seriously. Council's Budget Committee meets Thursday to consider the cuts, after which a special council meeting is scheduled to formally approve the budget that same night. The increase is less than last year's 9.6% budget hike, but well short of council's guidance of 3.5%. Gale is recommending 9 changes. 2 adjustments would reduce the levy-supported budget by $2 million combined. One would cut grants that cover industrial development charges to 50% from 100%, saving taxpayers an estimated $1 million. Municipalities use development charges to fund infrastructure needed to support growth, such as roads and sewers, police, fire, and parks. A staff report said the grant is a discretionary program introduced by council to support employment, growth, and attract investment. A jurisdictional scam found Niagara as the only Ontario region that uses grants to reduce development charges on industrial projects. The other significant change would use the region's main reserve fund to reduce the levy budget by $1 million, with a plan to replenish the fund over time with revenue generated through principal protected notes. They're known as PPNs. PPNs are structured investment vehicles that earn a high rate of return, more than traditional bonds and guaranteed investment certificates, while ensuring that the principal is safe. The Taxpayer Relief Reserve Fund ended 2025 with $32.6 million in the account and an uncommitted balance of $21.7 million. The reserve is designed to offset large property tax increases for residents and businesses by covering one-time unforeseen or temporary financial pressures such as pandemic costs or time-limited operational emergencies. Best practices for municipalities suggest keeping a balance between 10% and 15% of the region's gross operating expenditures, which equates to $90.3 million to $135.5 million, or $68.6 million to $113.8 million under target. Gale's proposed budget cuts also includes a funding contribution for the replacement of Niagara Emergency Medical Services facilities at $444,600, support for low-income funerals $200,000, regional membership in Federation of Canadian Municipalities $116,000, regional support for the Innovative Niagara program, which helps startups, $93,996. The local area municipality fund for economic development initiatives such as business attraction and buy local campaigns, $92,000. A full-time diversity, equity, and inclusion student intern at $48,810. His changes also include the addition of $262,800 to the balance sheet to reflect a provincial funding increase, though the details are currently embargoed. On January 8th, Council approved a motion put forth by Lincoln Mayor Sandra Easton to pause the budget process. The delay allowed Gale to review previous decisions and suggest additional cuts with assistance from the Chief Administrator's office. If passed, those savings will keep real dollars in the pockets of families and businesses where we can all agree it is better used, Gale said. Gale was appointed regional chair by Municipal Affairs and Housing Minister Rob Flack on December 18th to replace Jim Bradley, who passed away in September. Our next article, a mother reflects on decade of support for a missing son. Ben Trommels was last seen in 2016 in Niagara Falls. Ben Trommels left his Casey Street apartment in the north end of Niagara Falls on February 11th in 2016 and walked out into a cold winter night. He left without any personal belongings and carried no form of identification. The 24-year-old was never seen again. Monique Smith said her son was fun-loving and energetic, yet he struggled with significant mental health issues in the years leading up to his disappearance. In her heart, she feels her son took his own life, but without confirmation, she remains in limbo. "This is my closure," she said during an interview this week, to mark the 10th anniversary of her son's disappearance. "I just want to thank everyone who came out to all the searches over the years." Multiple land searches failed to turn up any trace of the missing man. In 2016, more than 500 people participated in a search of Fireman's Park. "I was so overwhelmed," his mom said. "These people just wanted to help me. I am so appreciative of all the people who have supported me over the years." Aerial searches of the Niagara Gorge also turned up nothing. After he vanished, Smith recalled conversations she had with her son when he was struggling emotionally. One particular conversation sticks with her. He said one day he was going to jump in the Niagara River and he would never be found. I said, "Quit goofing around," and then the next month he was gone. She's convinced her son entered the swirling water near the Whirlpool Bridge and that his remains are somewhere in Lake Ontario. Smith has submitted a DNA sample to Niagara Regional Police with hopes it will bring her the closure she so desperately needs. To date, the NRP has successfully resolved about 24 historical unidentified remains cases in partnership with Ontario's Forensic Pathology Services and the RCMP National DNA Databank. As of Tuesday, the service has 207 active missing person cases dating back to 1958, including approximately 20 individuals missing from the United States who have direct connection to Niagara Falls. Detective Constable Sarah Mummery, Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains Coordinator, said the NRP keeps in regular contact with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border and makes every effort to provide families with answers and closure whenever possible. All missing person investigations, including the case of Ben Trommels, remain open and active unless the individual is located, she said. It is our responsibility as a police service to support families and to pursue every lead should new information emerge. Smith holds out hope that one day there will be confirmed match to her DNA sample. But the hope is a double-edged sword. Her heart sinks every time she learns of human remains being found. It makes me twitch for weeks. Could it be Ben? Smith has since left Niagara Falls and now lives elsewhere in the region. I didn't want the reminders all the time, she said. I live near water, and it's nice and quiet. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Lots of ways to listen. You can listen live on our website at nfradioreading.org, of course on all major podcast platforms, your smart speakers, or download the new app in your Play Store. Next article, Fire Chief addresses safety at LTC home. Facility housing 87 residents set to close this year. Niagara Health's extended care unit in Welland complies with Ontario Fire Code regulations that were implemented more than a decade ago, said Welland's acting fire chief. Last week, the health system announced it will be closing the 115-bed long-term facility that is home to 87 residents, some of whom have lived there for more than a decade. The move is the result of extensive and costly upgrades required to meet modern design and fire safety standards, including the need for automatic sprinkler systems, said Lynn Guerrero, President and Chief Executive Officer of Niagara Health. The more than 50-year-old facility's provincial operator's license expires in June. Much of the challenge stems from changing provincial standards. In May of 2013, the province introduced strengthened fire safety regulations for vulnerable occupancy facilities, including long-term care homes, care and treatment facilities, and retirement homes. The rules were phased in over time and include requirements for improved fire alarm systems, enhanced staff training, detailed evacuation planning, and automatic sprinkler systems. For existing long-term care facilities, the final compliance deadline was January 1st, 2025. Matt Richardson, Welland Fire and Emergency Services Acting Chief, said the code changes are about protecting people with cognitive or physical disabilities who may be unable to self-rescue during an emergency. Richardson said the changes allowed facilities to apply for an approved alternative solution to the provincial measures, provided the solution still met objectives of the Ontario Fire Code. He said Niagara Health would have been required to install automatic sprinklers only in certain areas of the extended care unit and to integrate them into the existing fire alarm system as a separate monitoring zone. He said he understood retrofitting the unit could be difficult, either financially or structurally. I think the compliance window was the province's way of acknowledging that. Niagara Health, in an email, said installing a sprinkler system in a long-term care home built in 1972 would not have been a straightforward retrofit. It said underlying mechanical and structural systems were not designed to support modern life-saving retrofits at full coverage without major structural changes. Installing a system would have required intrusive construction throughout resident care areas, including opening walls and ceilings to install piping, control valves, and monitoring systems. As we experienced with the flood at the Welland Hospital last summer, in an older building, that level of work typically triggers additional compliance issues, expanding the scope and disruption, the email said. Because the home is connected to the hospital and the infrastructure is shared, work in one area can also affect adjacent units and broader building systems. The hospital system said this type of construction would likely require vacating resident areas, as well as hospital patients to be safely carried out. It said it would have also created significant infection prevention and safety challenges in the active long-term care environment and would have been highly disruptive for residents. In early 2024, Richardson met with Niagara Health to ask about its plans to bring the building into compliance. That initiated discussions about what they could do. I informed them they had the right to apply and submit an alternative solution to me as the chief fire official, said Richardson, who at the time was deputy chief overseeing fire prevention, community risk, and administration. Following those discussions, a plan prepared by a professional engineer from an accredited firm was presented to him. I reviewed it at length, and it met the same level of safety, objective, and functional statements of the fire code, and I approved it. It increased what the staff was already doing there. Niagara Health said, in an absence of built-in fire suppression, the home is operated with a comprehensive fire safety and evacuation plan, regular staff training, and drills conducted with the fire department. Niagara Health said the fire code changes and sprinkler system represent only part of what is required to meet today's long-term care. The building also does not meet current accessibility requirements or modern infection prevention and control expectations, meaning addressing a single issue in isolation would not resolve the broader safety gaps, it said in its email. This decision is not about a missed opportunity or a single upgrade that wasn't done years ago. It reflects the reality that fully bringing this building up to today's long-term care standards would require extensive, ongoing structural and system changes that are not feasible in a facility of this age and configuration, particularly while continuing to safely care for residents. Our next article, Beamsville man guilty of exposing himself to children. A Niagara man who exposed himself to several people, including children, on multiple occasions has been placed under house arrest. Adam Gluchowski, 34, appeared in Ontario Court of Justice in St. Catharines on Friday and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of committing an indecent act in public. Judge Jan Dubuis agreed to a joint submission offered by the Crown and defense and imposed an 18-month conditional sentence. The first 9 months of the sentence will be served under house arrest. The judge said she acceded to the joint submission because Gluchowski has undergone extensive counseling since his arrest, and his guilty plea spared his victims from having to testify in court. In July 2024, court heard Niagara Regional Police responded to the area of Wade Road near Margaret Street in West Lincoln following a report of a man committing an indecent act. Court was told an 11-year-old girl and her brother were riding their bicycles near a walking bridge when they observed a man masturbating vigorously. A victim impact statement from the girl was read into court. "I don't sleep as well anymore because I keep on having bad dreams," she wrote. "When I close my eyes, I see things I don't want to remember. I wish I could forget what happened, but it's hard because it keeps coming back in my head." The victim wrote, "The incident made me feel unsafe in the world. I hope no other child ever has to go through what I went through." The child's parents described how the incident has impacted the family. "What happened is something no parent ever expects or prepares for, and it has changed the way we live our daily lives," their victim impact statement said. The judge told the offender his actions have had a traumatic impact on the victims. "It's heartbreaking, quite frankly, to see the innocence and sense of safety taken from these young children," Bowie said. During the course of their initial investigation, police received a report in August of 2024 of a man committing an indecent act near the same location. In that case, a witness was able to take a video as well as a photo of the license plate of the man's car. Gluchowski was subsequently arrested. The ongoing investigation also linked him to a similar incident that occurred in the fall of 2023. Now, in that case, he exposed himself to children on Town Line Road in West Lincoln. Court heard Gluchowski, a resident of Beamsville, was previously convicted of a similar offense in 2010. He received a suspended sentence and was placed on probation. His name will appear on the federal sex offender registry for the next 10 years. Let's turn over to the opinion page of the Niagara Falls Review. The column Our View, auto industry driven down the right path. Henry Seth Taylor, does that ring a bell? Likely not. Yet Prime Minister Mark Carney turned to this largely forgotten figure of Canadian history to help frame the Liberal government's new multi-billion-dollar, multi-headed automobile strategy to remind us that the auto industry has been and will remain central to Canada's story. It's true that Taylor, a resident of Stansted, Quebec, built a steam-powered buggy fueled by a coal boiler, and yes, as Carney noted, this was in 1867, that most Canadian year. But what Carney didn't mention is that 3 years earlier, an American-made steam-powered buggy had been shown at the Stansted Town Fair, causing the Stansted Journal to gape at the wondrous novelty of an ordinary road carriage driven over the common highway without the aid of horses or other draught animals. Taylor's subsequent attempt to duplicate the feat did result in a first. Heading down a steep hill, his brakeless buggy crashed, thus for the history books resulting in the first automobile accident in Canadian history. And yet the story still works. Canada and the U.S. have been entwined on auto for as long as auto has existed. More than 500,000 Canadians bring home a paycheck because we make cars in this country. Yet more than 90% of Canadian-made vehicles are shipped south of the border. That's why Carney is right that with U.S. President Donald Trump sending the industry careening into an uncertain future, the time is now for Canada to set out a clear and distinct path. Carney announced last week a plan to transform Canadian auto manufacturing, driving it away from its reliance on a single trading partner through a series of complex initiatives. The strategy is to adapt, innovate, and become a global leader in electric vehicle production and autonomous technologies. That's a crucial global message at a time when the U.S. government is taking the opposite tack. Last September, the Trump administration did away with almost all tax credits for new and used EVs. The country's EV infrastructure program has been curtailed, and the goal of 50% EV adoption by 2030 is dead in the water. It is encouraging to see that Carney is continuing to push in the opposite direction, though in the market-based style his government prefers. Under Carney's plan, the Trudeau's government's controversial electric vehicle availability standard, which set zero-emission sales targets for auto manufacturers, is no longer. Instead, manufacturers will have more flexibility in how they meet stronger greenhouse gas emission standards, which the government hopes will result in the country achieving 75% EV sales by 2035. That's fast, and 90% by 2040. The new plan will see the launch of a 5-year affordability program, with incentives of up to $5,000 this year on the purchase or lease of EVs made by countries Canada has a trade deal with, and $2,500 on hybrids. It also seeks to address the lack of EV refueling infrastructure. The government intends to induce the private sector to swiftly build out a national network through a $1.5 billion pot dedicated via the Canada Infrastructure Bank. The biggest ticket, well, spurring investment in Canadian auto manufacturing. The Carney government will use the revamped Strategic Response Fund to allocate up to $3 billion in investment to help the industry adapt, grow, and diversify to new markets. What that will really mean in the world of auto manufacture will take months, if not years, to come clear. Any auto worker can cite chapter and verse the billions that go into retooling a single plant. But just as easily, any Canadian auto worker can attest to being held hostage to the winds of U.S. commerce, the shutting of a shift at GM's Oshawa plant being just the latest example. So Carney's right. This is a pivotal moment for the auto industry and the Canadian economy. The tariffs have upended the bargain that has existed for as long as I've lived, he said last week. This upending brings pain and risk, but may also push us to pursue opportunities. At this government's best, it has shown a desire in wedding principle and pragmatism. Carney's plan looks to be an example of just that, an attempt to reorient Canadian auto manufacturing toward a greener, more prosperous, less dependent future, but at a pace our embattled industry can withstand. From the Niagara Voices column, Remembering Our Rinks of Dreams, written by Joe Barkovich, a notice posted online by the city a week or so ago stirred up memories long in hibernation. Volunteers needed for maintenance of outdoor skating rinks. Outdoor rinks, pond hockey, back when I was a kid, just about everyone in the hood had a pond of dreams. That was a few decades ago and not years. The Hewitts, Foster and Bill were up in the gondola over the ice at Maple Leaf Gardens. Murray Westgate was your welcoming, trusted SO dealer. And at the Forum, the best play-by-play man in hockey, Danny Gallivan, had just described a shot by Jean Beliveau as a cannon of a drive. You put on CBC Saturday night after trudging home from the backyard rink, chilled to the bone, so cold the cup of hot chocolate your mom made for you turned into a chocolate shake in your hands. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but it wasn't far from the truth way back in the late 50s and early 60s. Backyard rinks and public rinks where pond hockey ruled throughout winter were commonplace. I've shared this previously, but our pond of dreams was behind the Matthews House on King Street in Welland. It wasn't far from Welland Arena, or King Street Ice Palace as affectionately known. Yvonne DuPont wrote about it for a special report in the newspaper in 2009. There was an old railway boxcar at the end of the rink, and we used it as a backstop. There must have been 1,000 balls and pucks shot at it. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon and into the evening, the pond was filled with the locals. These were the years that I remember best. But DuPont played away games on the pond hockey circuit as well. My brother and I made our own hockey nets out of wood and potato sacks. We would carry them to different locations and challenge kids to a game of hockey. Rick David wrote about a rink at Empire School, gone now but not forgotten. We'd outgrown our York Street backyard rink, so my dad, Omer David, talked to Principal James Allen, and the rest is history. The baseball diamond became our rink, backstop and all. Kids cleared the snow, Dad flooded. You went to the pond, stick in one hand, shovel in the other, before school, after school, lunchtime, recess, weekends, all day into the night. Janet DeSalorias wrote about a pond hockey rink at Memorial School. It was built and flooded by the volunteer fire department in the 1940s. My dad, Iggy Luzina, made the ice scrapers and had them available at our house bordered on the rink. We had a gate. The older boys would come after school to get the scrapers. I remember to this day my dad skating around the rink. I was always impressed with his speed and the flawless way he skated before turning off the lights each night. And Paul Turner shared pond hockey memories going back to childhood days at Chippewa Park. The best part of the day was that first touch and first glide on the ice. A typical day would start around 9:30 a.m. We went home for lunch, but back to the pond for 1 p.m. We went home for dinner and returned to play into the night. Life could not be more perfect than playing hockey with friends on Chippewa Park Pond. The pond hockey event of the year comes up in a few days. Julia's Hope Cup and Carnival is at Chippewa Park Saturday. Already known by most in town, it's a fundraiser for Hope Center honoring the memory of Julia Turner, daughter of Paul and Tina. Let's celebrate stories of yesterday and today. Let's hope stories will continue for those to come as part of our community's history and culture. To paraphrase a line from a favorite essay about Sunday morning basketball, for it is written on the walls of childhood, there is no greater waste than an unused pond hockey rink. Joe Barkovich is a member of the Niagara Voices Community Editorial Board. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Don't forget, all of your content's available online at nfradioreading.org. You can listen live there, or whatever your favorite podcast platform is. So, from arts and leisure, Niagara's Malivoire Gamay Noir shines at Canadian Culinary Champion. The nation's top chefs faced off at the Canadian Culinary Championships in Ottawa recently, and one of their tests featured Gamay Noir wine from Niagara's Malivoire Wine Company. They just didn't know that right away. The event took place over the weekend of January 3rd and 31st. Tension was in the air as the 10 chefs and their teams put the finishing touches on their offerings. They each had created a food pairing to match with the mystery wine that they'd been given that morning. They had to taste it blind and devise and deliver what they considered the perfect pairing by early evening. It was the first of 3 events during the weekend that was judged to determine who would win the coveted Top Chef Award. Each of the chefs had already won top spot in their regional competition, which earned them the chance to represent their home city in the national contest. As the sun went down, the mystery wine was poured for the eager guests and judges. They proceeded to swirl, sniff, and taste the wine, then try it with the creative food pairings. A myriad of ingredients were featured in the precision plates. Guests circulated around the various stations and relished the range of intriguing dishes on offer. At the end of the evening, when both guests and judges had sampled the gourmet delights and mystery wine, came the big reveal. First, the chefs were gathered on stage and quizzed about the grape varietal region, the winery, and the vintage of the wine. It turned out to be the 2024 Gamay Noir made by Malivoire in Beamsville. For Shiraz Moteri, a longtime winemaker at Malivoire and now general manager, it was a huge honor for our wine to be chosen. The Malivoire Gamay Noir is a dry, medium-bodied red wine with bright acidity and very soft tannins. Red fruit presents an elegant complexity with notes of raspberry, red cherry, and pomegranate. The wine can please a sophisticated palate or be equally enjoyed by someone new to wine. It's very accessible both in terms of approachable flavors and its price point. The wine sells for $21.95 a bottle and is available at the winery and the LCBO. Our medium-bodied, light red, fruity Gamay is going to grab a lot of people and might keep them there too. The competition really demonstrated how versatile it is, Matier added. He did have a few favorites. What I would say about those dishes is they got the balance right. So the protein that they used was really flavorful and had a bit of richness to it. The wine really balanced that off beautifully. They also usually had some sort of fruit component that I thought really lifted the fruit in the wine. Chef Miguel de Leon from Moncton served barbecue pork tenderloin tartare with 3 variations of beets and topped with chopped hazelnuts and fresh herbs. Chef Dean Fast of Calgary concocted a cured and confit salmon sausage with a hint of apple, strawberry, ginger, lime, and rhubarb foam. Chef Jonathan Williams from Toronto placed a duck and pork pâté en croûte with red berry sauce, cranberry gel, dried strawberry rehydrated in black tea with roasted beetroot and compressed radicchio. For Matier, Gamay Noir is the pride of Malivoire's portfolio. It's right at the very top for us. It has such a unique characteristics and a real strong personality. It's different from Beaujolais, and it's different from every other red in Ontario. It's really its own thing in the world, and you have to celebrate this. So for Malivoire, Gamay is right at the very top of the echelon. Jill Troyer is an award-winning journalist, wine writer, and author of The Winemaker's Gamble. She lives in the heart of Niagara wine country. Next up from Canada and the world, the page from the Niagara Falls Review. Trade talks. PM says Trump bridge threat will be resolved after talk. I explained that Canada paid for the construction of the bridge, Carney said. Prime Minister Mark Carney said Donald Trump's threat to stall the opening of the Gordie Howe International Bridge will be resolved following a call with the U.S. President Tuesday. I explained that Canada paid for the construction of the bridge, $4 billion, that the ownership is shared between the state of Michigan and the government of Canada, Carney told reporters in Ottawa before the weekly cabinet meeting. The Prime Minister said he also told Trump that Canadian and American steel and workers were involved in the bridge's construction. In a social media post late Monday, Trump insisted the U.S. must be compensated before he'll allow the bridge to open. He claimed the bridge was built with virtually no U.S. content. Now the Canadian government expects me, as President of the United States, to permit them to just take advantage of America, Trump posted. What does the United States of America get? Absolutely nothing. In his post, the president complained about U.S. liquor being removed from Ontario stores and repeated misleading allegations about Canada's dairy sector and its limited tariff deal with Beijing on agricultural products and electric vehicles. Carney said his conversation with Trump involved a series of issues that Ottawa will follow up on in tandem with negotiations on the Canadian-U.S.-Mexico agreement on trade known as CUSMA, C-U-S-M-A. The Continental Trade Pact is up for mandatory review this year. Trade talks between Canada and the United States have been frozen since October, when Trump was angered by an Ontario-sponsored TV ad that quoted former President Ronald Reagan criticizing tariffs. While Trump said Monday that we will start negotiations immediately, a White House official speaking on background said the president was referring only to the talks about the bridge. The president asked that U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, who is from Michigan, help smooth the conversation on the bridge, Carney said. The bridge connecting Windsor and Detroit is supposed to open sometime this winter after delays. The bridge's construction was negotiated over decades by both Democrat and Republican administrations and state leaders. The project faced massive pushback from the Morin family, which privately owns the rival Ambassador Bridge and is a major Republican donor. Our next article, Ottawa aiming to add 8,000 new EV charging ports. The federal government is looking to increase the number of electric vehicle chargers across the country as part of its new automotive strategy, but is well short of the number it was advised is necessary to support the transition to battery-powered cars. Energy Minister Tim Hodson on Tuesday said Ottawa is planning to spend more than $84 million to add 8,000 electric vehicle charging ports to Canada's existing stock of more than 30,000 chargers. The announcement did not cite a timeline for getting the charging ports in place. In a 2021 analysis commissioned by Natural Resources Canada, Montreal-based consultancy Duneski Energy and Climate estimated Canada would need 52,000 chargers by the end of 2025. Natural Resource Canada data show there are more than 38,000 public chargers now in almost 14,500 different locations across the country. The rollout of EV charging ports slowed last year, when only 6,170 ports were built, down from more than 7,000 in both 2024 and 2023. Most of Canada's charging infrastructure is concentrated in Ontario and Quebec, which together account for 67% of all charging ports across the country. BC has another 20% share, while Alberta is home to 5% of all charging ports. Prime Minister Mark Carney said last week Ottawa would spend $1.5 billion on EV infrastructure as part of a suite of changes to the federal auto strategy. That announcement included the return of an EV rebate program offering Canadians up to $5,000 toward the cost of an eligible fully electric vehicle and $2,500 toward plug-in hybrids, with diminishing rebates every year until 2030. Carney also announced the end of the EV sales mandate in favor of stricter emission standards for the auto sector. The federal government is committing $5.7 million to help companies transition their fleets to more fuel-efficient options and $7.2 million to help educate Canadians about electric vehicles. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Your reader, Chuck Stevens. And from the business page, airlines send empty planes for Canadians stuck in Cuba. The process of getting travelers home will take a week or more, Air Canada says. The day after major Canadian airlines halted passenger flights to Cuba, efforts continued to pick up thousands of stranded passengers on the island and reschedule travel to the country. Air Canada, WestJet, and Air Transit announced they would be suspending southbound flights to Cuba after the government warned that aviation fuel would not be available at airports as of Tuesday due to a shortage. Air Canada and WestJet are sending empty planes to the island to fly travelers home, while Air Transit is in the process of organizing some extra flights. So how many travelers are waiting to return to Canada? Air Canada said Monday approximately 3,000 customers were in Cuba awaiting flights home. Air Transit told the Star, that's the Toronto Star, it had more than 6,500 customers in the country. Brittany Comone and her husband Dave were enjoying their vacation in Veradero when she learned flights were stopping. The couple spent their Tuesday afternoon waiting for a bus to take them to the airport so they could return home to Burlington, Ontario. The night before, the hotel management advised her to bring water to the airport and be prepared to be sent back to the hotel. At the airport, waiting to board her flight, Calmon said she was relieved to be heading home. Checking in took forever because the power would shut down every 10 minutes and reset all the computers, Calmon said. Otherwise, we love Cuba, and there's nothing that would stop us from coming back. There were very minute issues, but they've done a good job, very minute issues, but they've done a good job of making sure tourists have a smooth trip. Bianca Mazzetti from Toronto said she's anticipating becoming more stressed as she waits for her return flight to Canada Sunday. Staff are mainly just trying to distract us with the regular shows and events they have, she said from her resort in Cayo Coco. I also don't feel comfortable talking to them about it because they have to deal with us and deal with the impact of the fuel shortage in a bigger way. She arrived in Cuba last Sunday in a party of 10 other travelers and says she hasn't noticed much difference from her visit last year besides a sadness in the air. So how are the airlines bringing travelers home? Well, Air Canada will be operating return flights as scheduled, but without taking anyone south. This has the benefit of allowing people to complete their holiday, and it also avoids any uncertainty or potential issues around changing people's flights, airline spokesperson Peter Fitzpatrick said. For customers now in Cuba who wish to come home sooner, we have put in place a special policy that allows people to change their originally booked flight to an earlier one at no cost, provided there is space on the aircraft. Fitzpatrick added that the process of bringing travelers home will take a week or more, and Air Canada has not set a definitive end date. For the remaining flights, Air Canada will travel with extra fuel and make stops to refuel as necessary, the airline said in a media release. Affected Air Transit customers will be contacted directly by the airline, which will provide their return flight details. Our priority is to ensure their orderly return to Canada. To this end, flight plans are currently being prepared and will be deployed over the coming days, said spokesperson Marie-Eve Valeres. WestJet said it operates up to 15 flights a day from Canada to Cuba over the winter. It said customers currently in Cuba will return home as planned, and the airline is focusing on bringing travelers back to Canada as planned on or before Monday. What if you have a scheduled trip to Cuba? Well, Mitchell Piper, a registered nurse from Manitoba, said he had been keeping up with airline news on Monday and was gutted to learn his WestJet flight scheduled for February 26 was canceled, 12 hours after the airline had said his flight wouldn't be affected. Well, with his trip in limbo, Piper wasn't sure when he'd be able to see his partner in Cuba, their 18-month-old daughter, and deliver much-needed supplies like food, portable chargers, and emergency lights, so he decided to go to Cuba another way by taking 2 different airlines through the United States and Panama at a cost of $1,500, 3 times more than his original flight. If I get stranded in Cuba because of the situation there, at least I'm with my family, he said. So why does Cuba have a shortage of commercial aviation fuel? Mark Manager, a professor of political economy and global affairs at the University of Toronto, said Cuba's shortages were not suddenly caused by an oil embargo. It's deteriorating rapidly, but the situation has been really bad for the past 2 or 3 years, he said. Manger's friends on the island have told him the situation is dire, with electricity out, schools closed, and hospitals reduced to the bare minimum. When Cuba is not earning foreign currency, it cannot purchase gas, Manger explained. My worry is that it's going to result in some kind of humanitarian catastrophe. The government of Canada updated its travel advisory to Cuba in early February, advising travelers to exercise a high degree of caution. In a social media post on February 3rd, the government warned the situation was unpredictable and could deteriorate, disrupting flight availability on short notice. John Gradick, a lecturer with McGill University and a former Air Canada director, said planes always carry more fuel than needed to account for delays, weather, and other unforeseen circumstances. Calculating those margins for a return trip could push some planes beyond their fuel capacity. If I'm carrying an extra pound of fuel on the airplane, I have to carry additional fuel in order for me to be able to carry those extra pounds, Gradick said. There's a pure economic decision that's being made at a certain point in time to say that it's not worth it. In sports, the Milan Cortina 2026, a short track silver for Canada, women's hockey team minus the captain of their team, loses to the American team. Canada's women's hockey team suffered its first loss of Milan Cortina Olympics as the United States blanked them 5-0 in Group A action on Tuesday. Hannah Bilka with 2 goals, Caroline Harvey, Kirsten Sims, and Layla Edwards scored for the reigning world champions, while Ariane Franco made 20 saves for the shutout. The defending Olympic champion Canadians were without captain Marie-Philippe Poulin, who suffered a lower body injury in Monday's 5-1 win over Czechia. Earlier, Canada picked up its first silver medal of the Olympics in the short-track speed skating mixed team relay. William Degino, Kim Boutin, Felix Russell, and Courtney Serault finished in 2 minutes, 39.258 seconds, behind host Italy and ahead of Belgium to give Canada a silver and 2 bronze at the Games. Stephen Dubois and Florence Brunel also earned silver after skating in the relay earlier in the day. The mixed short-track skaters, led by breakout star Dan Janot, entered the Games as the reigning world champions and the favorites for gold. But silver was still a bit of redemption after Canada was disqualified in the mixed relay final at the 2022 Beijing Olympics. Boutin and Serault were on that 2022 team. It sets the tone, Dan Janot said, about winning silver. It's nice to have and to share as a team. It's the first Olympic medal for Dan Janot, who captured 3 golds and a silver at the 2025 Short Track World Championships, and 5th for Boutin. Meanwhile, Dubois, a 3-time Olympic medalist at the 2022 Beijing Games, was eliminated in the 1,000-meter preliminaries after falling in his heat following contact with Britain's Niall Torresi. Dan Janot and Roussel also making his Olympic debut advanced by winning their preliminary heats. Roussel posted the fastest time of the round, 1 minute 23.828, while Dan Janot clocked at 1 minute 24.672. On the women's side, Serault, Boutin, and Brunel all moved through the 500-meter preliminaries. Serault and Boutin won their heats, while Brunel finished second in hers to reach the quarterfinals. For Canada's women's hockey team, the loss to the U.S. was the first Olympic meeting between the rivals since Canada defeated its neighbors south of the border in the 2022 gold medal final in Beijing. Canada will close out preliminary play Thursday against Finland, and Hockey Canada says captain and star forward Poulin is listed as day-to-day with a lower body injury. Her availability is uncertain for Saturday when Canada is scheduled to play its quarterfinal. In Cortina, Canada finished 13th in the women's alpine team combined as Valerie Grenier skied the downhill and Laurence Saint-Germain ran the slalom, posting a combined time of 2 minutes 24.05. Also from the sports page, the Ice Dogs unable to weather the storm. Guelph doubles Niagara as interconference point streak is snapped. The Niagara Ice Dogs' first pick in the Ontario Hockey League draft was also their top player on the ice when they hosted Guelph Storm in a rare Monday night game. Ryerson Edgar, 16, fourth among rookies in scoring, was selected as the third star of the game after netting his 18th goal of the season and collecting an assist. His star turned in the spotlight before an announced crowd of 3,667 at Meridian Center in St. Catharines. Didn't put a smile on his face, however. Given the choice, the right-shooting center from Holland Landing, Ontario, just north of Toronto, would have preferred to end the night in the win column, not on the three-star list after a 6-3 loss. Overall, it's been pretty good, but I think it's better than when we win, he said. In order for it to keep going well, I would like us to keep winning, Edgar said, of his first season competing at the major junior level after being selected 10th overall in the 2025 draft. For Edgar, adjusting to a league in which the players are bigger, faster, and stronger goes hand in hand with the team's success. I think as a team, we really work together well, and I think playing as a team benefits me, and it benefits everyone, he says. If we keep playing as a team, everyone will do well. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 11th issue of the Niagara Falls Review. We read from the Niagara Falls Review every Sunday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Chuck Stevens. As always, thank you for listening.